Hello. Have you ever thought about how much it costs to drive a car? And how would you even measure it? Would you do it in cents per mile or dollars per year? And what sort of variables would be important in that sort of calculation? And why would you care about that number? What would you use it for? These are the sorts of questions we're going to think about in this section as we look at an overview of the modeling process. This section is the first section in Chapter 1, and Chapter 1 is all about the Modeling Process Toolkit. And we start off with a quote from George Box that says, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." And that's helpful to remember throughout the course, is that we're not looking for the right answer, we're just looking for a useful answer or maybe a better answer. So let's talk a little bit about the modeling process. We'll get into this in more detail in future sections, but for today we're just doing an overview. And so we're going to think about it in terms of 4 stages. So let's say we're presented with a real world question and we want to try to solve it. Now that question is probably going to be messy, it's going to be vague. It might say, what's the best way to do this? Or find the optimal something, fill in the blank. So the first step we're going to have to do is define the problem. We're actually going to have to figure out what is the specific problem we're going to solve. So we're probably going to have to simplify the question a little bit. We're going to have to figure out what variables are important. And we're probably going to have to make it simple enough that we can actually get started. Because most likely the real world question is daunting enough that it may not even be clear how to get started. The next step is to build the model. And this is where we're going to use the math skills that you already know or that we'll learn in the course. That could be a lot of different things. It could be algebra, calculus, differential equations, simulation, statistics or probability. Lots of different tools are out there. But one way or the other, at the end of this stage, hopefully we'll have some sort of model that will give an answer to our question or at least help us analyze the question better. Which brings us to our third stage, which is analyze the model. This is where we reflect back on what we did and say, did this even answer the question? Is this a useful model? What sort of error is involved? Is there so much error that our model is not really that great? Or is it accurate enough to be usable? And if it is, then we'll go on to the stage that we'll call report the results. And that's where we actually have to communicate this to someone else. So assuming this real world question was from some other client that is asking for our help, then we're going to have to take the complicated math that we use and somehow simplify that in a way that our model will be usable to that person. So there's an implementation aspect to this stage to make it a helpful model. Because if it's too messy or complicated to use, then it's not a good model. We also need to communicate strengths and weaknesses. What are the limitations of the model? So there's a lot of effective communication that we're going to need to report the results well. So this is the modeling process. Notice this is just one version of it. There's lots of different ways you can present the modeling process. If you look in other resources, they may use slightly different words, or you may see it as a cycle. Okay, because normally when you get to the end here, you may decide, okay, that was an okay model, but we can do better. And you might actually go back to define the problem and maybe have fewer assumptions and use more variables. But no matter how, whatever scheme you use, the reality is it's not going to be this clean. The modeling process is probably going to look more like this. And this is just an example. But notice how we started to define the problem, we started to work on a model, and then we started back over because something went wrong. In fact, maybe we have to do 2 stages back and forth. And then we make a little more progress, and then we realize as we're analyzing, we have to go back. We finally get to report the results. We think we're done, and we realize, no, this still isn't quite what we needed. So we have to go all the way back to define the problem and go through the process again. And of course, reality could be even messier than this. But the point is, we want a simple process to at least give us a framework so we know how to attack an unknown question. And then within that, we'll allow ourselves to bounce around if we need to. So that brings us to an example. How much does it cost to drive a car? And so think about that. And in our next video, we'll use that problem to help us see an example of the modeling process in action. So we'll see you then.